Early autumn, I was 42 and between longer contracts, taking short-term technical work wherever it landed. This assignment put me in a small inland town that had once manufactured things and now seemed to run on logistics, maintenance crews, and municipal paperwork. Days were mild, nights cooled fast enough that the air smelled metallic by morning. I rented a basic furnished room above a closed insurance office on the main road. My routine settled quickly. Coffee from the only diner, 8 hours of work, then quiet evenings reviewing reports or walking a few blocks just to loosen my back. The town felt subdued but functional, clean sidewalks, intact storefronts, nothing boarded up. People kept to themselves, and I was used to that. If you subscribe, I'll keep sharing these quiet, realistic accounts the way they actually happened. The job was straightforward. Digitize outdated compliance records for a regional storage facility on the edge of town. They rotated outside contractors to keep staffing lean and avoid long-term payroll. I was scheduled for 2 weeks. Housing was arranged through a local broker, paid up front, with a key left in a plain envelope downstairs. The worksite was isolated but well-maintained, operating only during daylight because they kept a small crew. My only inconvenience was how little existed after late afternoon. No grocery store open past then, no restaurant besides the diner. I assumed it was economics. The broker mentioned, almost casually, that things shut down early here. I took it as small-town practicality, stocked up on food, and stopped thinking about it. On my second evening, I noticed the storefront lights going dark earlier than I expected. Not gradually, almost in sequence, like someone flipping switches down the street. By the time the sun slid behind the tree line, the road was empty. No cars, no pedestrians. Porch lights stayed off. I checked my phone, 5:47 p.m. Still light out. I told myself it was shift schedules lining up, people heading home. Later, taking out trash, I stood on the stairwell landing longer than necessary. The air was unusually still, no insects, no distant traffic. I went back inside and locked the door without deciding to. Over the next few days, the pattern repeated with a consistency that started to feel operational. Activity stopped well before dusk. The facility closed earlier than posted hours, citing local protocol. I offered to stay late to catch up after a corrupted batch of scans, and the supervisor declined without hostility, just certainty. Driving back toward town, I noticed vehicles accelerating as the light faded, as if everyone was racing the same invisible deadline. Once, I pulled into the diner at 5:30 and found chairs already stacked, lights dimmed, a handwritten closed sign that looked permanent. No explanation posted. My calls to the broker went unanswered in the evenings. During the day, people were polite but brief, like conversations had preset limits. When I asked about hours or town routines, the responses flattened and ended. Even wildlife seemed absent after sunset. No dogs barking, no birds settling. At night, from my window, I could see the main road stretching empty under working street lamps. Perfect visibility. Nothing moving through it. The realization came quietly, while I was reviewing timestamps in old facility logs to confirm a chain of custody. Every entry stopped within the same 10-minute window, regardless of season or staffing. Years of records, no exceptions, no variants. I felt a tightening that wasn't fear so much as professional discomfort. Patterns without documentation bother me. I considered reasonable explanations, safety policies, liability concerns, local ordinances. But nothing in the binder referenced a curfew or restriction. The absence itself stood out. I caught myself checking the time more often, calculating daylight. If you enjoy slow burn, realistic horror, a quiet like tells me you want more of this kind of account. I still told myself I was overthinking it, until I started feeling not watched, exactly, but accounted for. One evening, a corrupted file set delayed my upload. It wasn't dramatic, just the kind of technical problem you don't abandon mid-process if you care about the integrity of the records. By the time I left the facility, the sky had that flat, cooling look it gets before full dark, when colors drain and edges sharpen. The access road was empty. No other vehicles, no distant headlights. The storage buildings behind me were already dark, as if they'd never been active. Halfway back, I saw a barrier arm lowering across the road ahead, automatic, unmarked. No signage, no warning lights. I slowed and stopped with a few yards to spare, expecting it to rise again on a timer. It didn't. My phone lost signal, not with a clear no service, just a stalled screen that wouldn't refresh. Then I heard a second mechanical sound behind me, a clean, controlled whir, and in the rearview mirror I watched another barrier drop, boxing me in. The engine noise felt too loud in the stillness. I stayed inside the car, hands on the wheel, breathing normal, waiting for a system cycle or a remote operator. Minutes passed, and then, without any change in the sky, the street lights along the road shut off simultaneously. Not flickering, off, all at once, leaving only a thin residual glow from the horizon. I reversed slowly until I felt the car's tires cross the edge of the road gravel. The rear barrier hesitated mid-descent, like it had a sensor delay. I used that small pause, backed through, and didn't stop to examine how close it was. I drove faster than necessary, heart steady but mind sharp, until town lights reappeared. By the time I reached my room, it was fully dark, and the street was silent again, as if the road had never been there. That night, I packed essentials without rushing: wallet, keys, laptop, backups, a jacket. Then I read my contract again, looking for language that would make the barrier a known condition: curfews, restricted movement, safety zones. There was nothing. In the morning, I contacted the company and cited access issues and equipment concerns, keeping my description factual. I requested reassignment. They approved it without argument, unusually fast, as if the request fit a template. When I returned to my room at lunch, an envelope sat under my door with a partial refund in cash and no note. I finished the bare minimum paperwork that day and didn't stay past noon. I avoided the access road entirely, taking a longer route out. No one tried to stop me. In daylight, the town looked normal, quiet, cooperative, unremarkable. Weeks later, reviewing my files, I noticed something I couldn't explain cleanly. My final log entry timestamped itself automatically, 5:42 p.m., despite being saved in the morning. I checked metadata from earlier days. Same thing. Entries created at noon, saved at noon, but labeled with that narrow pre-sunset window. The system clock corrected itself only after I left town. I searched for the town online. It exists, but there's no mention of curfews, safety notices, or incidents. Satellite images show the access road uninterrupted. No barriers. I still have the key from my room. It doesn't match any standard manufacturer I recognize. Occasionally at sunset, I find myself watching the light fade and counting minutes without knowing why. I don't think the town was dangerous in the way people expect. There was no violence, no threats, just boundaries enforced with quiet precision. Whatever happens after sunset didn't involve me, because I left in time, and that detail still feels important. I've worked many temporary jobs since then. None of them lock themselves away from the night. When places close early now, I ask why. If the answer is vague, I leave before the light goes flat and the road becomes too empty to measure. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who prefers grounded horror, and subscribe for the next account. Late spring, I was 39 and working contract to contract as a network reliability auditor. Most of my jobs were the same shape: small towns, aging infrastructure, long days in the field, quiet nights uploading data. This one sat near the edge of a dry basin, scrubland, hard light, and long sight lines that made distances feel honest. I stayed in a single-story municipal rental with plain furniture, municipal Wi-Fi, and no personal touches beyond a laminated emergency number on the fridge. If you subscribe, I'll keep sharing these realistic accounts the way I remember them, quietly and without embellishment. My routine was predictable: mornings at relay sites, afternoons documenting signal degradation, evenings syncing logs and reading until I fell asleep. The town felt sparse but orderly. Nothing looked abandoned. People were efficient, reserved, but civil. It didn't feel unsafe. It felt managed. The assignment was 10 days. My task was to confirm why cellular coverage dropped nightly across a wide radius, triggering compliance penalties. Local technicians blamed environmental interference: heat, shimmer, dust, terrain. The equipment logs didn't match that story. They showed clean performance during the day and an abrupt narrowing of throughput at roughly the same time each evening. I was given full daytime access, escorted once, then trusted alone. The only odd instruction came verbally, as if it didn't deserve paperwork. All exterior work had to end before evening. No time specified. I assumed it was heat-related safety policy. Supplies arrived early each morning. The town office closed by late afternoon, which aligned with the small population. I noted it and planned accordingly. On the third day, I noticed every exterior security camera I passed had been angled downward. Not damaged, deliberately repositioned, so the lenses covered only chest height and below. Indoors, monitoring screens worked normally. Outdoors, coverage stopped where faces would be. Later, while calibrating a repeater near a service lane, my shadow stretched unusually long. Not from the sun's position, but because several light sources behind me shut off in sequence. I checked the time. Still daylight. I finished the task and drove back without incident, telling myself infrastructure quirks accumulate in neglected towns. Over the next few days, I realized something else was changing before sunset, and it wasn't lighting, it was visibility. Street-facing windows looked slightly opaque from the outside, as if treated with a matte film. Reflective surfaces dulled. By late afternoon, the town seemed flattened, depthless, like the world had lost contrast. Indoors, everything remained clear. Outdoors, distance collapsed. I couldn't judge how far away a vehicle was until it was close enough to hear on gravel. No one acknowledged it. Workers packed up early without urgency, the way people do when they've done it for years. My signal tests started showing deliberate throttling, not interference. Bandwidth narrowed to near zero, but only on outward-facing transmissions. Internal systems stayed robust. The town wasn't losing connection. It was containing it. I began finishing my routes earlier, even when my schedule didn't require it. The realization came while reviewing topology maps in the rental's quiet kitchen, the air conditioner ticking on and off as the heat drained from the day. The network formed a closed loop every evening, no outbound paths. Emergency channels included. It wasn't a failure. It was design. If you enjoy slow-burn, realistic horror, leave a like. I felt a mild but persistent unease, not panic, more the professional discomfort of seeing a system built to hide its edges. There was no policy violation I could point to, only choices. I stopped standing outside after mid-afternoon. I didn't know what I was avoiding, only that staying visible felt incorrect. On the 7th day, a firmware update delayed me. I was on a relay tower platform when the light shifted in a way I can't describe cleanly, like a photograph losing contrast from the corners inward. The sky was still bright. The basin was still there, but the terrain below me began to look simplified, as if detail was being removed rather than darkened. I started down the ladder and realized I couldn't see the base clearly. Depth perception was gone. The rungs felt farther apart than they were. I kept 3 points of contact, moving slowly, refusing to rush my body into a mistake my eyes couldn't correct. My phone was in my pocket. When I pulled it out, it didn't show no service. It showed nothing, no bars, no text, as if the interface had forgotten what to display. Halfway down, movement registered in the corner of my vision. No shape, no silhouette, just displacement, as if something passed between me and the remaining light. I stopped. The wind had dropped. The only sound was my own breath and the faint hum of the equipment above me. No siren, no warning, nothing dramatic. I forced myself to continue, rung by rung, keeping my head still so my eyes couldn't invent distance. When my boots finally hit the gravel, the ground felt normal under my weight, but the world around it felt thin. I reached my vehicle by following the fence line more than by sight and drove while there was still outline left in the landscape. That night, I submitted a partial report and kept it clinical. I described the throughput behavior, the closed-loop topology, and the risks of contained emergency channels. I used the closest phrase I could justify, architectural containment practices, and requested removal from the assignment. Approval came within an hour. No questions. In the morning, my access credentials were already expired. The municipal office was open. Staff were polite, helpful, and silent about my early departure, as if it were expected. I returned the rental key, loaded my equipment, and left before noon. Once I crossed the county line, my phone flooded with delayed notifications, emails, pings, system alerts, all time-stamped before sunset the previous day, arriving at once like water released from a valve. Months later, reviewing archived signal data, I noticed outbound packets time-stamped after my departure, but addressed to no external destination. Internal echoes, cleanly formed, looping as if sent outward and caught by an invisible wall. The town still appears on maps, but street-level imagery ends abruptly at a certain time of day, as if the camera simply can't see what happens after the light starts to drain. Sometimes, near sunset where I live now, I catch glass reflections dulling in a way that makes my stomach tighten. It's probably coincidence. I still avoid standing outside when contrast begins to fade. I don't believe the town was hiding something dangerous in the usual sense. I think it was hiding something incompatible with being seen. Locking doors would have been crude. They chose something cleaner. Reduce visibility, collapse distance, close the network, angle the cameras down. Safety doesn't always look like protection. Sometimes it looks like erasure. Even now, when late-day light turns flat and the horizon feels too close, I find myself stepping back indoors before the world simplifies. Share this with someone who prefers grounded horror, and subscribe for the next account. Early winter, I was 44 and working as a freelance archival conservator, restoring water-damaged municipal records for small towns that couldn't justify a full-time staff. This place sat tucked into dense woodland, reachable by a single maintained road that curved through pines and bare hardwoods. Snow came and went, never deep enough to isolate the town, just enough to soften edges and mute sound. I stayed in a renovated guest house behind the town hall, clean, practical, heated evenly, with a small kitchen and a desk by the window. My days were quiet, gloves, soft brushes, humidity controls, scanning fragile documents. Evenings were spent cooking simple meals and logging progress. The town felt orderly and understated, like it preferred not to draw attention. Subscribe if you want more of these realistic accounts told the way they actually felt. The contract covered 3 weeks of restoring old property records, census binders, and transit logs dating back decades. Most of the pages showed water exposure, warped corners, tied lines, ink that had feathered and then dried in place, but there was little explanation of how it happened. The clerk who hired me emphasized preservation over interpretation. I wasn't there to cross-reference anything externally. My job was to stabilize, digitize, and index what remained so it could be searched and stored. Access hours were technically unrestricted, but everyone in the building left by late afternoon. I assumed weather and long commutes. The town hall itself remained unlocked. Lights stayed on. I appreciated the trust. I often worked alone in the evenings, something I'd done elsewhere without issue. The silence was productive. While scanning transit ledgers, I noticed a recurring absence that didn't match normal record keeping. Every daily log ended before evening. Not just incomplete, formally closed. Dates, signatures, final stamps. Always before sunset. No corrections. No notes explaining why. I assumed administrative batching, some old habit from when staff left early. Later, I checked the building's security logs for my own peace of mind. Camera footage existed continuously, but the motion tracking data stopped each day at the same time. The cameras didn't turn off. They simply recorded nothing moving. I dismissed it as a software fault, maybe an outdated setting tied to daylight hours. As I worked deeper into the archives, the pattern widened in a way that felt less like habit and more like policy. Utility usage reports, snowplow routes, emergency response logs. All activity ceased before sunset. Not reduced, zeroed. The town clearly functioned the next morning, so the absence wasn't real-world absence. It was absence on paper. I stayed later intentionally one evening, walking the halls after the last employee left. The lights hummed softly, heat pushed from vents in steady pulses. My footsteps echoed in the corridor the way footsteps always do in public buildings. Out of curiosity, I checked the live occupancy monitor on a wall-mounted screen near the front office. It showed empty rooms. I stood under a sensor and waved slowly. No change. I tried another hallway. No change. Mirrors showed me clearly, tired face, winter jacket, scanning gloves still on my hands, but the system didn't register me. It felt less like exclusion and more like non-recognition, as if I were present but not being counted. If you enjoy slow-burn, realistic horror, leave a like. I realized the town didn't lock itself physically. It locked its records. After sunset, movement wasn't prohibited. It was simply undocumented. For someone whose career depends on traceability, that landed wrong. Things without records can't be verified later. They can't be argued. They can't be appealed. I debated whether staying late compromised me professionally, even if nothing else happened. There was no danger I could articulate. Just a creeping awareness that existing outside documentation carried a risk I couldn't measure. I started doing what I tell clients to do with fragile paper. Stop before damage occurs, not after. One night I stayed too long restoring a damaged ledger, an old property book with pages that had fused at the corners. It was the kind of work you do slowly, breathing through your nose, letting the paper relax under controlled humidity. When I finally saved my scan batch and checked out digitally, the system didn't acknowledge my exit. The screen accepted my credentials, then returned to the home page as if nothing had happened. I tried once more, then stopped. I didn't want to create messy data I'd have to explain later. Outside, snow was falling lightly, small, dry flakes that made the air feel granular. The town looked normal. Street lamps cast clean cones of light. The road was empty, but not oddly so. I decided to walk the block behind Town Hall to clear my head. Halfway through, I glanced back at my footprints. They were there, crisp ovals in the thin snow. Then they began to fade, not from new snowfall filling them in. They faded from the bottom up, as if the snow had never been compressed. I stopped and watched. The impressions smoothed out into untouched powder. I took one step forward and looked down. No imprint formed. I shifted my weight deliberately, heel to toe. Nothing. I felt present, boots on ground, cold air on my cheeks, but unrecorded even by the surface beneath me. I didn't run. I turned back in a controlled way, kept to the lamp light, locked myself in the guest house, and waited for morning with my coat still on. The next day I ended the contract early, citing personal reasons in the calmest language I could manage. There was no resistance. The clerk thanked me and processed payment immediately, as if early endings were common. My exit paperwork printed cleanly and showed I had left the building the previous afternoon, correctly time-stamped. There was no record of me being there afterward. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions I couldn't prove I had a right to ask. I packed my equipment and notes, cleaned the guest house as instructed, and left before sunset. The road out was plowed, the trees still, the town behind me quiet in daylight like it always had been. Later, reviewing my scanned files, I found blank sections where pages should have been, always corresponding to dates after sunset. The scans weren't corrupted. The images were simply absent, as if the files had been saved with empty space. My personal notes from those evenings existed physically in my notebook, but had no digital metadata attached to the photos I'd taken of them. They couldn't be indexed properly. Even now, some of those files resist categorization, like the system can't decide where they belong. I've stopped working late hours entirely. Not because something bad happens, because something fails to happen, and that absence feels worse. I think the town understood something most places ignore. If an event can't be recorded, it can't be questioned later. Locking doors keeps people out. Locking records keeps responsibility out. I still restore archives. I just make sure my work ends while there's proof I was there. Some boundaries aren't enforced with force. They're enforced with silence, and the smooth snow behind you, as if you never crossed it. Share this with someone who prefers grounded horror, and subscribe for the next account.